Hello, welcome to another episode of the series Camille Flammarion 2024. And today we have the pleasure of sharing the studio with Dr. Humberto Schubert Coelho. Hello, Humberto.
Hi, Moni. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
Well, very well, thank you. I hope we can contribute to this initiative of great merit of presenting some of the old classics of Spiritism.
Yeah, oh, certainly. It's a pleasure to share the studio with you. And today we will have Dr. Coelho talking to us about premonitory dreams and divination of the future. And we have this tremendous pleasure of sharing the studio with him. So before we start your presentation, let me just quickly introduce Dr. Coelho to those who don't know him. He's a philosophy professor at the University of Juiz de Fora in Minas Gerais, in state of Minas Gerais in Brazil, and also co-director of the research group in spirituality and health, also at the same university, at the University of Juiz de Fora in Brazil. He's a member of the Brazilian Academy of Philosophy, visiting researcher at the Ramsay Center for Science and Religion, Oxford University in the United Kingdom, and a member of the Spring Spiritist Society, Sociedade Espírita Primavera in Brazil, and also related to social communication in the Brazilian Spiritist Federation. He is the author of several Spiritist books and articles, and normally in dialogue with philosophy. And also the co-author of the book Science of Life After Death, together with doctors Alexander Moreira Almeida and Mariana Costa. So I don't know, Humberto, if you want to add anything to your presentation, to your introduction, sorry, and feel free to do that.
Thank you, Munir. I'm satisfied. I would just like to add that I beg your pardon, but I changed my subject a little bit to the book God in Nature, which includes mediumship and other mental faculties that allow us to experience this spiritual world. But I will try to remain more in my comfort zone, which is metaphysics and the relationship between science and religion and so.
Yeah, I think there's no problem in that, because we know that Camille Flammarion, in many of his books, he talks about the same subject, sometimes from a slightly different perspective, but the subjects, they are, all related, and you will find, topics related to a certain subject in most of his books, if not all of them. And of course, those dealing with spirit phenomena, because he also has books which are basically in astronomy, and we can find the subjects, basically in all of his books. And even the topic of today, the topic that was chosen today, is part of a book, is actually an article within a book. And the subject, as you mentioned, you can find that same subject in all the books, or most of the books, his books. But the thing is that, we want just to encourage, to, bring to those watching us the books, and perhaps, create in them this curiosity to, look for his books and read them. So this is the basic ideas. We're not here to, discuss the book in terms of content and detail and lecture on that, but actually to, create this urge in people to, find more about Camille Flammarion, the scientist and the spiritist writer, and also to get to read his book. So I won't take, more of our time. So I'll leave the studio to you, Humberto. Again, it's a pleasure to have you here. So I'll be backstage if you need me, but the studio is all yours.
Okay, well, I'm very thankful for this opportunity, and I hope we can stimulate people to actually reading Camille Flammarion's works, which are invaluable, of extreme importance to the correct understanding of some key subjects, such as, for example, the plurality of inhabited worlds. He was maybe the strongest advocate of life in other worlds, in other planets. He was also actually mocked because of that, because for a certain period of his life, he actually believed that pretty much every planet would be inhabited, and it turned out not to be true. So for some people, that's a reason to mock him as someone very exaggerated. But in fact, he was applying the philosophical principle that if God is a supreme, wise, intelligent, just, and generous, merciful source of reality, then we would have to expect that the entire universe is meaningful and not a sort of craftsmanship for our appreciation. So the multitude of stars and galaxies and planets would be less meaningful. They would have near to no purpose if only a small part of this marvelous handiwork, like the psalm says, was used and subject of admiration. So we would like to start with this psalm because it has everything to do with God in nature, which is Flammarion's work. Well, that psalm was quoted by the director of NASA when the James Webb Space Telescope was launched, and it actually started working. As we know, James Webb allowed us some of the most astonishing and precise pictures of our universe, of nature. And here you have one of these pictures, very impressive, that exerts a huge impact on our consciousness as beautiful, not only complex and not only a way of spotting the origins of our universe in very old ages, but also these pictures have revealed great beauty, more than we were already used from previous photographs and telescope images. So the quotation here is not so much about religion only, but it is also a way of connecting aesthetics and science. Because when we say the heavens declare the glory of God, the writer, the poet, King David probably, that wrote this psalm was thinking about how the starry sky reveals or declares or proclaims the beauty of creation. So that's how heavens reveal or declare the glory of God. They do it by declaring or by showing us its beauty. And in the next sentence, he says, and the firmament proclaims the work of his hands. It is another way of promoting science or a rational analysis of what nature is showing us, because the firmament reveals the maker. Creation, or what was made as nature, as creation, reveals the maker. So it is a very old poem, about 3,000 years old, and NASA's director, Mr. Nelson, choose this psalm as very representative of what we actually feel and think when we watch the amazing picture provided by James Webb Telescope. So starting with Flammarion himself, in the next slide, please. The book Dieu dans la nature, or God in nature, is essentially a sort of popular science book relating what science has accomplished so far in 1866 with the idea of God. And materialism was already strong at the moment, and it was getting stronger and stronger every decade, until the point of, as we know, communism and fascism in Europe, and extremely materialistic society in the United States, and the degeneration of civilization throughout the entire 20th century, the destruction of the world, all the processes that we now acknowledge as harmful and as processes that should be checked, should be put in control by a larger and more integral understanding of life. Now, they started more or less in the age of Allan Kardec or Camille Flammarion. And the purpose of the book was not to promote religion. That's very, very important to observe. While religion asserts the existence of God, firstly based on experience, but very quickly, in a second moment, based on dogma, science might investigate if the concept of God is or is not compatible with our knowledge about nature. So science speaks about nature. It actually analyzes nature. It should not speak so much philosophically about nature. And that's one criticism I will present against Camille Flammarion. But science's purpose is to analyze nature, to understand nature. But through this knowledge, through this understanding of the natural world, we can take some philosophical assumptions or implications for other concepts, such as the concept of God. So here we have to separate the realm of religion from the realm of science. For many now, Spiritism is a sort of religion. And if we understand Kardec correctly, to a certain extent, he allows Spiritism to be called a religion, because Spiritism helps connecting human beings with God. That's a very philosophical interpretation of religion, of the word religion. But if by religion we mean a doctrine that is closed and that is based on some dogmas that we should not discuss, then Spiritism is definitely not a religion. It is a philosophy that prefers a relationship with science than with institutions or doctrines that we would usually associate with religions. So that's absolutely key. And that's one reason why Spiritism is not well understood in our moment, in our generation, contrary to the generation of Léon Denis or Flammarion or Gabriel Delan or Allan Kardec. Now, in our generation, it eventually became a sort of church or a sort of religion, which is problematic. It does not correspond to its original nature. And God in Nature is a very good example of that. It is not a religious defense or a religious apology of God, although obviously there is some apologetic tone in the book, but it is, instead of that, it is an attempt to connect science and a spiritualistic philosophy. So in the next slide, please, we have some considerations about the very old, now 150, 170 years old myth about the opposition or the contradiction between religion and spirituality. Again, if we use the word religion for dogmatic doctrines or institutions, then yes, obviously, it is in some opposition to science, because science is essentially, or should be, essentially open-minded and should focus on the pursuit of truth and not on the enforcement of its beliefs and dogmas. So the problem is that spirituality or religiosity, or religion in the philosophical sense, was always closely connected to what we now understand as science. When, for example, the Greek classical thinkers, the Greek intellectualists, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, founded philosophy and actually rational thought and critical thinking itself, they also founded theology, not as a religious doctrine, but as a philosophical discipline, as the rational investigation of God. Therefore, theos logos, theos logia, the rational investigation, like psychology is psyche logia, psychologia. It is the rational logia, the rational investigation, the study of a specific subject. In the case of theology, God, or the gods for the Greek. Now, Francis Bacon, 2000 years after that, when he was creating the scientific method, the modern scientific method, with René Descartes and Galileo Galilei, he said that God had formed the mind of man as a mirror or a glass, capable of the image of the universal world, and joyful to receive the impression thereof as the eye receives the light. So, as the eye was made by the Creator to adequate itself to the light, to be proportional to the light, also the mind was made to be adequated, to be accommodated to whatever is considered by the mind, whatever could be perceived by the mind. So there is a correspondence between reality and our minds, our consciousness, and that's how we understand things. So in the next slide, we can consider how nowadays some scientific works support this vision. I have, in the end, one example of my own work, because I do work with that also. But the first two references are extremely strong, much stronger and much more relevant. One of them comes from maybe the ultimate classic of science and religion debate, which is the Oxford professor Alistair McGrath, that for many years held the chair for science and religion. at the Jan Ransu Center for Science and Religion, in which I and Inácio Silva, the other author there, studied under his guidance and many other remarkable, amazing researchers such as Andrew Pinson, for example. Well, in the fine-tuned universe, Alistair McGrath will present us theories very, very similar to God in Nature from Camille Flammarion, just 150 years younger than the book. And Inácio Silva, great mind, an Argentinian philosopher, theologian, and physicist, wrote Providence and Science in a World of Contingency, Thomas Aquinas' Metaphysics of Divine Action. Well, although Thomas Aquinas is an old author, he's a medieval author that lived about 800 years ago. The book is not about medieval philosophy only or exclusively. It also deals with quantum physics and very, very contemporary notions in science and philosophy. And therefore, I would strongly recommend the book. There is also a Portuguese translation, a Spanish translation of the book, and you can read the original in English. And the Argentinian philosopher is, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, maybe now the main name in divine providence and related subjects. In the next slide, please. Well, let's come to Flammarion himself. I always like to criticize the authors I'm analyzing, and I will be very harsh, very respectful, but very harsh with Flammarion, because I believe that I strongly believe that Spiritism is a philosophy and not a religious cult in which we should worship our authors or consider them untouchable authorities that should not be questioned. On the contrary, I always make a critical reading of all books from mediums or whatever, from the Bible, from the Gospels and so. And I believe it is very helpful if in the start of our conversation we acknowledge some problems in the text or some recurrent problems of this author that this author presents. In the book, Flammarion is unnecessarily aggressive against the Catholic Church mainly, and also materialists. Now, he has very good points and very good arguments against both, but at some points he's just too aggressive. He mocks or he's somehow disrespectful with these two traditions, and that was something typical of the time. And in the evolution of literature, especially scientific literature, we learned to be not only more polite, but also more generous, more charitable with our enemies. So we do not have to spare the enemies when they're wrong, but we have to treat them more fairly and present their ideas at their best, the best version of their ideas. For a very learned person, he is also somehow philosophically naive. As a philosopher, I claim that that's the probably main problem of all Spiritist authors and speakers, and especially more recently. Now, when I read a book from our days or from 2, 3, 4 decades ago, I see a very dramatic, very embarrassing philosophical naivety that harms and that actually corrupts the essence of Spiritism, which is philosophical. And when we read authors such as Allan Kardec or Leon Denis, who are philosophers, are very competent philosophers, then we can at some points not recognize other interpretations as faithful to what Spiritism is actually presenting. That's not a problem of Camille Flammarion, obviously. I'm talking about recent decades and the current state of Spiritist literature, which is really bad, really maybe our worst moment. But in Flammarion's time, we can already spot that some Spiritist thinkers, they are just not up to the task of presenting the philosophical aspects of Spiritism correctly. And he also made some naive assertions and even small mistakes about the history of philosophy. But in his defense, I will talk about that later. He is also very learned. He is a very well-educated man. Difficult to find, a sort of man difficult to find in our days. And if he has flaws in his presentation of philosophy, it is only because he presents philosophy and philosophical notions very frequently. So he commit more mistakes than today's Spiritist speakers and authors who pretty much do not talk about philosophy at all. And at some points, we have to be honest, he has a certain arrogance, a way of putting himself on the top of a long list of opponents or enemies who he is actually diminishing a little bit. So that's very typical of French literature. It is very common of the French culture that you present your adversaries or your opponents in a very negative way. But it strikes us as bad and inappropriate, especially today, because it feels that he could not indulge in some level of self-criticism, or he could not just consider the possibility that his opponents could be correct sometimes. So in the next point, we'll emphasize, obviously, Flammarion's advantages or powers or his great abilities and talents. In the next slide, please. Well, among his many qualities, he was a very, very good writer. Every writer, including romance writer, poetry, poets, and literature writers, would be jealous of his capacity and his virtuosity. He's just pleasant to read. The text reads well and is pleasant throughout the books. He's also a competent scientist. That's his main field is not literature. He's a great writer, but he's also mainly a scientist and actually an astronomer with objective scientific accomplishments. For example, I believe he was the first to detect moons in Neptune and many other astronomical observations. He was a pioneer in some astronomical observations. He detected some celestial bodies, craters, and so, and therefore he has craters and other celestial bodies named after him. But more importantly, he was a very prolific writer of popular science. He wrote actually much more in popular science than in scientific research itself. And he was tremendously popular at his time. He was intellectually honest, despite being a bit arrogant here and there. He was always looking after the truth and not trying to defend, to sustain, to hold his beliefs only. So in that respect, I would say that he's more intellectually honest, or he's much more a scientist than some contemporary popular science authors who are not so much interested in the truth and very frequently negotiate the truth for their personal agendas, political agendas. That's happening very frequently now. Or they negotiate the truth in favor of their beliefs, their dogmatic beliefs about, for example, materialism. Next slide, please. Well, he had a very invaluable asset or two that we now lack in our generation, which was erudition. He was extremely learned in history, philosophy, literature, and obviously science, his main area, his dominant area. He was extremely competent in literature, in history of religion, in history in general, and he was fairly competent in philosophy, not as good as Leon Denis or Allan Kardec, for example, but he was well learned. So he could mention several ancient sources, medieval sources. He was familiar with all the classics, from Goethe to Shakespeare, from Immanuel Kant to Schopenhauer. And because of that, because of this erudition, he was greatly persuasive. He was very, very appealing to the audience or to the public in general. Although his main topic was cosmology, I would say he was mainly a cosmologist, and including his research, also his presentations on mediumship, on dreams, on clairvoyance and premonition. These are subtopics of his view of the world. He has a very, very broad understanding of how nature or how the universe worked. And in this very broad vision, he would have to explain from the formation of the stars and the planets to the beginning of life on Earth, through the biological realms and systems to psychology. And he would relate all of the subjects in a very big cosmology, or in a very big worldview. Well, yes, and next slide, please. Now, I would say that reading the entire book, what actually strikes me is something that appeals to me, and I try to address in my own work, in my own research, which is the anthropic principle. We have other names for that. We could include similar concepts or neighbor concepts such as teleology or fine-tuning. We have many names for that nowadays. Emergence, maybe. Creationism, or I don't like so much the word intelligent design, because some fundamentalist Christian authors advocated intelligent design in the middle of the 20th century, and the word was eventually rejected as pseudo-scientific. So it's not a strong word anymore, but in the original meaning of the word, it would correspond more or less to fine-tuning or to the anthropic principle as well. So the thesis behind this now very famous principle is that the universe is extremely precise, and in fact too precise in terms of its fundamental laws, so that very, very small changes would make either celestial bodies or at least life impossible. So if we change every variable from 0,01 at any level of magnitude, it would probably destroy the universe. So it is very unlikely that a universe so numerically precise, so to say fine-tuned, is a product of chains only. Could not be random. So a very interesting example that I like to give of how intelligence can be spotted in natural laws is that we actually cannot speak about natural laws, about nature, without using spiritualistic language or human language. For example, purpose, intention, intelligence, wants, wills, desires. We use these words all the time in science in general. And even more so in biology. As the great neuroscientist Ian McGilchrist observes, we use sentences such as, the cell wants this or that, the selfish gene, or altruism in animals, or that plant developed a mechanism, an evolutionary mechanism to, or the immune system, which is not a person, responds to. So the DNA especially carries information that instructs, that does this or that. So how is it possible that the immune system, which is not an agent, not a person, responds to, analyzes this or that, carries information, detects? These are intelligent capacities, intelligent faculties, and only agents, intelligent agents, could perform like that. So next, please. Just to play with some numbers, we have here one. The first is related to a fact. The first big number we have here is 10 elevated to 80 potency, which is like a 10 with 80 zeros, is the number of particles in the universe, the actual number of particles in the entire universe. Now, if we speculate, it's not a fact, but if the number of neutrons would have to cover all the empty space in the universe, and there was no empty space, nothing but neutrons one by the side of the next one, then we would have 10 elevated to 128, which is a ridiculous number. It's 128 zeros after 10. And then we have the anthropic principle, which we just mentioned, is a principle highly considered in science and philosophy nowadays, which would be a chance against 10 followed by 300 zeros. That's a very, very absurd, very ridiculous number. It would fill many pages, actually. And then after that, we have an even more ridiculous number with just 700 zeros more than the anthropic principle, or almost 1,000 zeros more than the number of particles in the universe. Okay, and that would be the likelihood of the Darwin eigencycle emerging by chance. But here's a catch, a tricky thing. The Darwin eigencycle does exist. It is an actual principle, an actual law of nature, as far as we understand now. It is a relatively recent principle, but it seems to be the best way to describe some processes in the DNA, in the chromosomes that select and carry information. And it is so complex, and it is so precise that the combinatory chance of it emerging by chance randomly would be almost zero. It would be nearly impossible to happen by chance. So there are some phenomena in nature, some laws of nature, that almost tell us that an universe ruled by chance is irrational and impossible. So next one, please. I would strongly recommend what I consider the most important book bridging science, philosophy, and some aspects of art nowadays, which is The Matter with Things, by Jan McGilchrist, who also authored The Master and His Emissary, another very impressive book. They are massive collections of data, very cleverly assembled in order to support revolutionary theses, not only in neuroscience, which is his field, but also in cosmology, in our understanding of the mind, in consciousness studies, and in philosophy of science, in our understanding of how science works, how science performs its job. And so I would say that if anyone wants to make a similar job to Flammarion, Gods in Nature, one would have to start with The Matter with Things, with a broader vision of what science can tell us about reality now, and which are the exact philosophical implications of this very large scientific view of the world that we now have. And so I finished my presentation with this invitation for spiritualists, for spiritists, for whoever thinks freely about these subjects, that we are not satisfied, that we not remain in the same place in our comfort zone regarding the relationship between science and religion, but that we dare to challenge ourselves and to challenge our misconceptions, our beliefs about how these realms should relate to each other. And that can be very fruitful. That could lead us to another creative moment similar to that led by people like Frederick Myers, Flammarion, Denis, or William James, and many other authors 100 years, 150 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Humberto. Thank you very much indeed. I'm really delighted to, see from the eyes of someone who is, strongly with a strong background in philosophy, to look not only at Camille Flammarion, the subject itself. It's a great, great contribution. I'm sure that those watching us will be delighted as well. And we have to, sort of understand. It's important to bear in mind that all these people, they gave the best of them. Mm-hmm. But of course, they had weak points. They had strong points and weak points.
Exactly.
And it's important for each one of us, with all this background that we are providing. And now, you have, given us strong tools, actually, to look, from your perspective, which, as I mentioned, is of someone with a very strong background in philosophy. Because sometimes, we know a little bit of these science or philosophy or religion, and then we try to make sense or to establish, where these people are. Camille Flammarion, Léon Denis, Gabriel Delan, and all of them, of course, Kardec as well. But, it's been very, very good. And I'd like to ask you something, and, correct me if I'm wrong. I see you mentioned that, some of the weak points of some of the negative aspects of Camille Flammarion's personality was that he was a bit too aggressive and arrogant at times. But don't you think that during that period, half 19th century, to establish yourself as, a scientist, and you had two great enemies, the churches and materialists. They were also very aggressive. We see books, we see that. So the environment was aggressive.
Exactly.
I think that you might establish yourself being, very emphatic, being very, how would I say, I forgot the word now, but, strong in your points, and, going as far as being a bit aggressive. Otherwise, you would be devoured, eaten by these people. I mean,
absolutely. I think it's excusable and justifiable, and obviously, in a couple of years from now, people will watch this presentation and they will make a list of the mistakes I committed, and that's perfectly natural. So we are determined by our limitations to some extent, and that's not a way of diminishing anyone's contribution or anyone's goodwill and merits. So I consider these people my friends. And in a fair analysis, in an honest analysis, I always try to list not only the contributions, but also the problems or the weak spots, not necessarily the flaws, but the weak spots. If the text would be rewritten now, I think the author would have to be more careful with that attitude. And so, but it's a 150 years old text, so it's perfectly natural that in an extremely aggressive environment in France, which is by far the most aggressive culture in Europe, it is very, very aggressive literature. It was always like that since the Renaissance. If we read, for example, Rabelais or many other authors, it's 10 times more aggressive than other aggressive authors, such as Thomas Morus in England or Erasmus in Holland. And then we have Voltaire, Diderot, Molière. Jacques Rousseau was not so aggressive, but also a little bit. So it is a cultural tradition. And as a learned French man in a moment of clash between church and materialistic science, where people were usually very arrogant and very presumptuous in saying, well, you are all wrong, I am right. So that was the typical tone in literature. That was the standard. And at the same time, I think it is important because to be critical with our great writers also help us to protect ourselves from becoming a cult, from becoming a dogmatic religion, which is a process that I believe is in course. It is happening now. We are moving in that direction. We should not criticize Chico Xavier. We should not criticize Emmanuel or Divaldo or Kardec. And of course we should, because that's exactly what Kardec recommended us to do, that we do not take anyone's word as the ultimate truth, but as a proposal, a hypothesis, a theory that we should analyze with the best of our judgment. And if we believe it is slightly wrong, we should tell people that. And maybe I'm wrong in my judgment of Camille Flammarion, but I think in the process of criticizing, we are helping the public to be aware of the non-religious and very philosophical, very rationalistic aspect of Spiritism.
Yes, you mentioned something which is really important. We have to analyze things and not take or have an opinion without support about someone or someone's work. I always think it's very important for us to know very well the author. That's why we have these series, not just to know the work, but also to know the authors and also the context in which they lived when they wrote their piece of work, because then we can understand what they really mean when they write in this or that way. And Camille Flammarion, he wasn't a spiritist writing about spirit phenomena. He was a scientist writing about spirit phenomena. So
exactly.
Charles mentioned in the first lecture in January that Camille Flammarion, right at the end of his life, he wasn't still sure if he was a spiritist or not.
Yes.
But he brought an amount of data, and when we say that he was very honest in what he did, he was honest bringing all that to us, and he couldn't perhaps personally say, I'm spiritist, I'm totally convinced, but he was fair in his work and very, very honest, I think.
Yes. I just read the English Wikipedia entry for Camille Flammarion, and it is an example of a dishonest behavior because they portray Flammarion as an idiot, basically, as someone very superstitious and a pseudo scientist deluded by his spiritual and extraterrestrial life beliefs, and so and so and so. And they do not tell us anything about his accomplishments as a scientist, as an astronomer, about the fact that he was a respected scientist in the scientific community, and about the fact that his popular science books, despite being popular science books and not scientific books, they were well received by the most educated people in France and abroad at the time. So he was much more relevant than the people who wrote the Wikipedia entry against Flammarion, which is ridiculous. We should not do that. We should not diminish people who had objective, serious accomplishments. Maybe only if we have superior and far more impressive recognition and accomplishments, which I do not believe is the case, because they're anonymous and the references there are not very relevant. So sorry if I'm offending someone, but if we indulge ourselves in this aggressive tone, this is what happens. I prefer not being aggressive. I prefer to be more generous with everyone. And I can criticize Flammarion, as you all just saw, but I prefer to emphasize his qualities and merits. And in the end, I can have an honest picture of the man if I can criticize him and not worship him as a saint or a hero or a perfect soul. But at the same time, I respect and recognize his accomplishments.
Yes, this is what Spiritism is about. Kardec emphasized that so many times. Be rational and analyze. So we can take things, not even Kardec and worship Kardec as if Kardec was Spiritism. No, he did this brilliant work, just like all the others. But of course, his work is really, really special by the depth and the amount of his life he dedicated to the work, and the method he used and so on. But none of them, and he wouldn't be happy if we just worshipped Kardec and not the work.
Yeah,
just the person, and not,
an extraordinary man, but a man among men.
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed, Humberto. We are running out of time, so very, very important contribution we received as a gift from you today, and this is an invitation for people to read Camille Flammarion's books, and now they have to read and check if what we discussed here and in our previous lectures, they are what they think. It's important that we create our own opinion about that and have the right elements to do that. Not just talking, the negative aspects, emphasizing the negative aspect of someone, or the positive aspect and forgetting that he was a human being just like anyone else, but good aspects and not so good aspects. But to make up our mind and understand the work that he did, and also put that in the right place. Okay, so let me make some announcements before we end. Next month, on the 1st of September, we have with us Dr. Shani Martin. She'll be talking about lumen. So it's the same time, 7 p.m. British Summer Time. I also want to announce that on Wednesdays, 12 noon, London time, we have a study group, online study group. We study the book Heaven and Hell and the Gospel According to Spiritism, both by Allan Kardec. So you are most welcome to join us Wednesdays lunchtime. Also on Saturday, 10:30 a.m., Guilherme Dias, John Scamp, and myself, we coordinate a online study of the Medium's book. All invited. The Spiritist Society of London holds studies on Tuesdays, study online, 7 p.m. London time. So you are all welcome there. And finally, we want to thank Kardec Radio. All these wouldn't be possible without the generous help of Kardec Radio, who gave us the permission to use the studio and bring to you this important series about Camille Flammarion. So, Humberto, your final words before we go.
Just have to thank you and the initiative and the supporters of this series. And I would like to invite people to read the classics, because they are classics for the fact that they form the mind.
Yeah, wonderful. And it's important for people to know that there is Kardec, but there are also many other authors who did brilliant, serious work regarding Spiritism. So thank you again, Humberto. It's been very nice to share the studio with you. Hope to see you again in the future in a new series. And I hope to see dear people who've been here with us, watching us, on the 1st of September for another episode of the series about Camille Flammarion. So bye-bye for now. So see you soon.